Just a few months ago, no one had heard of Covid-19. Fast forward 3 months and Covid-19 is by far the world's most searched term. It's broken healthcare systems, crashed economies. Close to 2 million people have been diagnosed and it's killed more than 100,000 people so far. It won't end there, of course. This is just the beginning. And the question on everyone's mind is, how will this nightmare end? Hi and welcome to our channel. My name's Andy Goldberg. I'm a medical doctor, a surgeon and a father of 3 young kids. And just like you, confused and concerned by what's going on. So I wanted to do some research and present to you the facts to help you make up your own mind. In an era where science fiction is fast becoming science fact, where fake news is abundant, and where the news channels are simply repackaging the same old on a daily basis, I wanted to try and make some sense out of the facts. So for many of us, viruses just weren't on our radar. But that wasn't the case for all.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this.
And that was 2015.
We're not ready for the next epidemic.
He said we weren't ready, and he was right. So in 2003, which was the first time a coronavirus entered our vocabulary, the warning signs could not have been any clearer. At the time, cases of an infection of a virus causing respiratory distress, known as severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, were reported to the World Health Organization. The disease quickly spread across the world to 26 countries and created a media storm. The reason it wasn't as big as COVID, some would argue, because of impeccable interventions to stop the spread, such as quarantine and isolation. But then the interventions with COVID-19 are far more impactful and far greater than were ever done with SARS. And it begs the question that if COVID-19 is the sequel to SARS, then why is COVID-19 so much more ferocious? Is this a Hollywood thing? Like Terminator 2? Does the sequel need to be bigger and better? Or is there something else? So how deadly is COVID-19? Well, death rates are recorded as the number of people that die over those that have tested positive for the disease. Right now, COVID-19 is killing people at a rate of more than 5%. Yet, when you look at the number of deaths, Ebola killed 11,000 and SARS killed 774. And yet, according to the chart, they're much more deadly than COVID-19. So this brings up the next really important concept in disease transmission, known as the R0. If the R0 is less than 1, the disease tends to die out. Whereas if it's greater than 1, then it tends to spread. COVID-19 has an R0 somewhere in the region of 2, meaning that each person spreads it to about 2 to 3 people. They then spread it on to 2 to 3 others, and so on. After about 10 rounds of spread, maybe 2,000 or more people are infected. In contrast, seasonal flu has an R0 of 1.3, which means that after 10 rounds of spread, only 60 people will have it. And hence you can see why COVID-19 is a lot more spreadable than flu. So although the symptoms are similar, comparing COVID-19 to seasonal flu is a mistake.
This is like the flu.
It's a lot like the flu.
I like to believe that it's going to end up more like the flu virus.
SARS, which is just as contagious as COVID-19, killed 10% of people infected, and yet only 774 died. On the other hand, if you take, say, seasonal flu, which is far less contagious, we know, and it only kills 1 in 100 people, then why does seasonal flu kill 500,000 people each year? The numbers just don't stack up. Even if the case fatality rate comes down from 5% to 1%, which is what the experts think is a more realistic figure, that still means that potentially millions, and not thousands of people could die. There are just too many unknowns. We don't know how many people have got the disease with or without symptoms. This is especially important when it comes to recording the cause of death. On a death certificate, only one diagnosis is recorded as the prime cause of death. And this is obviously subjective. For example, if someone has a heart attack and is known to be COVID-19 positive, then it will be recorded as a COVID-19 death. On the other hand, if someone has a heart attack and never has a test for COVID, then it's recorded as a heart attack. We don't know how long people with COVID-19 are infectious for. We don't know if those that had the virus will be susceptible to reinfection. Finally, and most importantly, what happens when the current rules and restrictions are lifted and people start congregating and travelling again? So it's important to remember that all of this self-isolation and lockdowns do not and will not cure COVID-19. What they do is flatten the curve. The curve that everyone refers to represents the number of people likely to need critical care beds versus the number of critical care beds available. Heroic efforts are being made to increase critical care capacity, with makeshift hospitals being created in a matter of days, and these will save lives. But if healthcare systems overflow, doctors will be left with no choice but to decide who lives and who dies. The inconceivable rationing of life. So how will the COVID-19 pandemic end? Well, the end to a pandemic relies either on the development of a vaccine or where the world develops its own form of immunity, known as herd immunity. Herd immunity would stop the pandemic in its tracks because there'll no longer be enough people to transmit it. If we relied on herd immunity alone to control COVID-19, it could be a gruesome disaster. We only have to look back at history to a time before ventilators were available. In 1918, when H1N1 virus, at that time known as the Spanish flu, killed up to 50 million people, a third of the population at that time, it left alive only those strong enough to carry the torch of immunity. In fact, H1N1 never went away. In 2009, it reared its head once more, causing swine flu. Strangely enough, in contrast to COVID, it was mainly younger adults that developed swine flu. Could it be that the elderly possess some form of hidden immunity? What about new treatments? Treatments to lessen the severity of the disease or speed up recovery. Rife across the internet are tales of new miracle viral cures, from stem cells to off-the-shelf drugs repackaged as COVID-19 killers.
A drug called chloroquine, and some people would add to it hydroxychloroquine. Now, this is a common malaria drug. We're going to be able to make that drug available almost immediately, and that's where the FDA has been so great. They've gone through the approval process. It's been approved.
However, minutes later, the Food and Drug Administration said the drug had not been approved.
The nice part is it's been around for a long time, so we know that if things don't go as planned, it's not going to kill anybody.
An Arizona man has died after he took chloroquine phosphate because he believed that it would protect him from the coronavirus. You may recall the president has been talking about chloroquine in a tablet form.
Meanwhile, in the NHS in the UK, they've been rapidly funding new studies. For example, the recovery trial has recruited already over 1,000 patients, and that's looking at a host of new treatments, including hydroxychloroquine, as well as many other antiviral treatments. What about a vaccine? Polio was at its peak in the early 1950s, gripping America with thousands dying. In 1955, Jonas Salk developed the polio vaccine, and within 5 years or so, polio was next to solved. It sounds easy, but can the fast-paced internet generation put up with this kind of disruption for 5 years? Will stock markets revert to the Great Depression of the 1930s? More than 30 companies and academic institutions are racing to create a vaccine. Some have already identified candidates and have begun testing in animals, and so the race is on. But the development of any drugs takes time. Experiments to show safety, dosing, and effectiveness of a vaccine are not quick.
We would not have a vaccine that would even be ready to start to deploy for a year to a year and a half. That is the time frame.
But there you have it. The development of a vaccine could take 18 months, if not longer, especially if you take into account the need to scale up and mass manufacture, even if regulators fast-tracked every conceivable hurdle. The next issue is how long will immunity last? Will it be lifelong or a finite period of time? Viruses are prone to mutations where the genetic information stored inside them changes to make it subtly different than it was before. These challenges explain why it's 17 years since the SARS coronavirus pandemic, and yet still no vaccine exists. Perhaps a skeptic could argue that it's because the commercial drivers weren't in place. But this certainly is not the case with COVID-19.
I would love to have the country opened up and just raring to go by Easter.
Despite promises from politicians that the pandemic will be under control in a matter of weeks, we have to accept that the end is not close and that our lives will be very different for some times to come. Yet, no matter how uncertain and scary this feels, the fact is that human resilience throughout the years has never let us down. Providing we remain humane and caring and work cohesively, then our inner strength, innovation and creativity will help find solutions. And just like every other pandemic to date, we will get through this. and the world will be a better place and stronger as a result. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to our channel.